The manila envelope hit the kitchen counter with the weight of impending doom. Mark Stevens stared at the certified mail, his fingers trembling slightly as he traced the return address. Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association. Outside, the late afternoon Texas sun baked the suburban landscape, casting long shadows across meticulously manicured lawns that concealed a brewing storm of suburban warfare. He'd known this was coming, but the official documentation made it real. The HOA was suing him over a fence, a simple wooden barrier that had become anything but simple. Mark remembered the day he'd first moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago. Sunnyside Estates was the kind of place that looked perfect from a distance. Identical two-story homes with carefully coordinated exterior colors, immaculate landscaping, and an air of manufactured tranquility. The type of community where conformity wasn't just encouraged. It was enforced with religious zeal by a board of retired professionals who seemed to have nothing better to do than measure grass height and scrutinize mailbox colors. When he had initially installed the fence, Mark thought he was doing everything right. He carefully measured, obtained what he believed were the necessary permits from the county, and even consulted a local surveyor. The wooden fence, 6 feet high and made of cedar, wasn't just a boundary marker, it was a statement of privacy, a shield against the increasing density of suburban living. But the Sunnyside Estates HOA saw things differently. The first warning came 3 months after installation. A neatly typed letter arrived detailing multiple violations. The fence was 2 inches too tall, positioned slightly outside the approved architectural guidelines, and most absurdly, painted a shade of brown that was apparently 3 degrees darker than the approved top range. Mark had laughed then. It seemed so ridiculous, so petty. He wasn't laughing now. The certified mail contained a formal lawsuit. The HOA was demanding he remove the fence entirely, pay a series of escalating fines that had accumulated over the past 6 months, and submit a new fence plan for approval. The total cost would be astronomical, nearly $15,000 in accumulated penalties, legal fees, and potential reconstruction costs. What the HOA didn't know, what they were about to discover, was that Mark wasn't just any homeowner. A former land survey technician with 15 years of experience, he had a meticulous understanding of property lines that would make their blood run cold. His fingers traced the topographical maps and survey documents he carefully preserved. Something didn't add up about the HOA's claims, and Mark was determined to find out exactly what. The lawsuit wasn't just about a fence. It was about something much larger, a potential encroachment that would shake the very foundations of this picture-perfect suburban community. As he spread the documents across his kitchen table, Mark's mind raced. The HOA thought they were dealing with a typical suburban homeowner, someone who would buckle under bureaucratic pressure. They had no idea that their attempt to intimidate him would become their worst nightmare. His eyes narrowed, focusing on a specific section of the original property survey. There was something there, a detail so significant it could completely turn this legal battle on its head. The pool, the community pool that was the pride of Sunnyside Estates, might not be exactly where everyone thought it was. Mark took a deep breath, his professional training kicking in. Precision, documentation, evidence. These would be his weapons. Little did the Sunnyside Estates HOA know, but they had just picked a fight with the wrong homeowner. And this battle was about to get very interesting. Outside, a sprinkler system clicked on, sending a fine mist across perfectly trimmed lawns, a facade of perfection that was about to be dramatically disrupted. The Sunnyside Estates Community Center buzzed with nervous energy during the monthly HOA meeting. Karen Whitmore, the board president, sat at the head of the long conference table, her perfectly pressed blazer and meticulously applied makeup betraying nothing of the brewing storm. "We filed a lawsuit against Mark Stevens," she announced, her voice crisp and confident. "The fence is a clear violation of our community standards. We cannot allow one homeowner to compromise the aesthetic integrity of our entire neighborhood." Board member Robert Jenkins nodded in agreement, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. He's been nothing but trouble since he moved in. Always questioning, always challenging. What they didn't know was that Mark had been quietly preparing his counterattack. His years as a land survey technician had taught him one crucial lesson: documentation was everything. The next morning, Mark visited the county recorder's office. He'd spent weeks cross-referencing old surveys, property maps, and historical land records. Something about the original plat of Sunnyside Estates had always felt off. Sarah Rodriguez, the county clerk who had known Mark for years, raised an eyebrow as he spread out a series of meticulously preserved documents. "You got that look," she said, recognizing the focused intensity that had made him one of the most respected survey technicians in the region. "The original land division," Mark muttered, tracing his finger along a faded line on a decades-old map, "doesn't match the current property lines." It was more than just a discrepancy. It was a potential legal bombshell. Back at home, Mark began preparing his defense. The HOA thought they were fighting over a fence, like he was about to reveal a much larger issue. The community pool, the crown jewel of Sunnyside Estates, might be sitting on land that technically belonged to him. His research revealed a shocking truth. When the original development was created in the late 1980s, a surveying error had gone unnoticed for decades. The pool's current location encroached significantly onto what should have been his property line. Mark wasn't looking to cause trouble. He wasn't even interested in forcing the HOA to move the pool, but their aggressive lawsuit had changed everything. If they wanted to fight, he would give them one, armed with irrefutable evidence. He began compiling a comprehensive file: old surveys, property records, GPS coordinate comparisons, and detailed measurements. Each document was a potential weapon in the legal battle to come. His phone rang. It was his lawyer, David Ramirez, a former classmate who specialized in property disputes. "I've reviewed the HOA's lawsuit," David said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "And Mark, you're not going to believe this. They might have just opened a can of worms they can't close. The lawsuit over the fence was about to become something much bigger. A battle that would expose the fragile foundations of a community built on appearances and unchallenged assumptions." Mark looked out his window at the perfectly manicured neighborhood. The Sunnyside Estates HOA thought they knew everything about their little piece of suburban paradise. They were about to learn how wrong they were. And this was just the beginning. The first official hearing was nothing like Mark had expected. The conference room at the local courthouse felt more like a battlefield, with Karen Whitmore and two other HOA board members seated across from him, their expressions a mixture of condescension and barely concealed anxiety. David Ramirez sat beside Mark, a manila folder thick with documents resting casually between them. Mark could see Karen's eyes darting nervously to the folder, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming an erratic rhythm on the polished wooden table. "Mr. Stevens," Karen began, her voice dripping with manufactured superiority, "this is about more than just a fence. It's about maintaining the standards of our community." David leaned forward, a predatory smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, this is about something entirely different. Would you like to discuss the precise location of the Sunnyside Estates community pool?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mark remembered the months of painstaking research that had led to this moment. It hadn't been an easy journey. His investigation had consumed countless nights, forcing him to revisit every property document, every historical survey, every minute detail that most people would have overlooked. The original sin was a surveying error from decades ago, a mistake so subtle that it had gone unnoticed for nearly 35 years. When the Sunnyside Estates development was first constructed in the late 1980s, the initial land survey had been slightly off, by mere inches at first, but those inches had compounded over time, creating a significant discrepancy. What the HOA didn't know was that their beloved community pool, the centerpiece of their summer social calendar, the pride of their neighborhood, was actually sitting approximately 12 feet beyond where it should legally be, directly on what was technically Mark's property. David spread out a series of maps, each one telling a story of incremental encroachment. Original plat maps, modern satellite imagery, GPS coordinate comparisons. Each document was a piece of an intricate puzzle that would soon blow the HOA's case wide open. "We have documentation," David continued, his voice calm and methodical, "proving that the community pool has been illegally positioned on land that does not belong to the HOA. In fact, it's been on our client's property for decades." Karen Whitmore's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the sudden flush of panic spreading across her face. Mark felt a complex mix of emotions. He wasn't out to destroy the community. He didn't want to force them to relocate the pool or cause massive disruption. But their aggressive lawsuit had transformed this from a simple fence dispute into something much larger. The hearing was supposed to be about his fence, 6 inches too tall, supposedly positioned incorrectly. Instead, it was becoming an expose of decades of surveying mistakes and bureaucratic negligence. "We're prepared to present our full findings," David said, sliding a thick binder across the table, "complete with expert testimony from 3 independent land surveyors who have verified our claims." The room fell into a stunned silence. Mark could see the HOA board members exchanging panicked glances. They had come prepared to bully a homeowner over a fence. Instead, they were facing a potential legal nightmare that could cost the entire community millions. As the hearing continued, Mark realized this was about more than just a property dispute. It was about power, about a community that had grown so accustomed to unchallenged authority that they had forgotten the most basic principle of property rights: precision matters. The game had changed, and the HOA had no idea what was coming next. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Within days of the initial hearing, news of the property line dispute spread through Sunnyside Estates like wildfire. Neighbors who had once viewed Mark as an outsider now looked at him with a mixture of curiosity, fear, and grudging respect. The perfectly maintained facade of the community began to crack, revealing the fragile tensions that had always simmered beneath the surface. An emergency HOA meeting was called, packed with more residents than any previous gathering in the neighborhood's history. The community center, the same room where Karen Whitmore had confidently announced the lawsuit against Mark, now felt like a powder keg of emotions. This could bankrupt the entire association, whispered Robert Jenkins, the board member who had previously been so quick to criticize Mark. His voice trembled, revealing the true extent of their vulnerability. The financial implications were staggering. If Mark chose to pursue full legal action, the HOA could be forced to pay massive back rent for the improperly situated pool, relocate the entire facility, or worse, potentially face condemnation of the community's most prized asset. Mark sat near the back of the room, observing silently. He wasn't out for blood, but he was determined to make a point. Years of being treated like an outsider, of being nickeled and dimed by petty bureaucrats who thought they could push him around, had led to this moment. Sarah Rodriguez, the county clerk who had helped him research the original documents, had warned him. "Be careful," she'd said. "When you pull on these threads, entire tapestries can unravel." She was right. The surveyors Mark had brought in confirmed the impossible. Not just the pool, but several other community amenities were technically positioned on land that did not belong to the HOA. A maintenance shed, part of the tennis courts, even a section of the community garden. Decades of surveying errors, compounded by bureaucratic complacency, had created a legal minefield that no one had noticed until now. Karen Whitmore, once so imperious and confident, now looked like a deflated balloon. Her carefully constructed world of rules and regulations was crumbling around her. The very system she had used to bully homeowners was now exposing the association's most significant vulnerabilities. "We can negotiate," she pleaded during a private meeting with Mark and his lawyer. "Surely we can come to some arrangement." But Mark had learned something important through this entire ordeal. Negotiation wasn't about winning or losing. It was about establishing respect. "Here's what I want," Mark said, his voice calm and measured. "First, drop the lawsuit about my fence. Second, acknowledge the surveying errors. And third, implement a fair process for addressing property line discrepancies moving forward." The terms were surprisingly moderate. He wasn't looking to destroy the community or extract massive financial damages. He wanted accountability, transparency, a recognition that even in a place as meticulously controlled as Sunnyside Estates, mistakes happen. As the meeting concluded, Mark knew the neighborhood would never be the same. The illusion of perfection had been shattered, but sometimes breaking down false facades was the only way to build something genuine. The real battle was just beginning, and Mark was prepared for whatever came next. 6 months after the initial confrontation, Sunnyside Estates had transformed. The lawsuit that began over a simple wooden fence had become a catalyst for fundamental change. Mark hadn't set out to be a revolutionary, but sometimes change comes from the most unexpected places. The HOA board had been completely restructured. Karen Whitmore and 2 other long-standing board members had resigned, replaced by a more transparent group of residents committed to genuine community governance. Among the new board members was David Chen, a local attorney who had been quietly supporting Mark's push for accountability. Mark's original fence, the source of all the conflict, now stood as a symbol of something larger. It was still 6 inches taller than the previous regulations, but the new HOA bylaws had been rewritten to be more reasonable, more human. The property line issues had been professionally surveyed and officially corrected. The community pool remained in its current location, but now with a proper legal agreement that protected both the HOA and Mark's property rights. The association had negotiated a fair long-term lease that acknowledged the historical surveying errors. More importantly, the neighborhood had changed. The suffocating uniformity that had once defined Sunnyside Estates had given way to something more vibrant. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged perfunctory waves now actually knew each other. Community meetings became genuine dialogues rather than dictatorial proclamations. Mark found himself unexpectedly at the center of this transformation. He hadn't sought leadership, but his principled stand had earned him a new respect in the community. Residents who had once viewed him as an outsider now sought his advice on everything from property disputes to community planning. During a community barbecue, the first truly inclusive one in the neighborhood's history, Sarah Rodriguez from the county recorder's office raised a glass to Mark. "You know," she said, loud enough for others to hear, "most people would have backed down. Most people would have just paid the fine, moved the fence, kept their head down." Mark smiled, watching children play and neighbors chat, a scene so different from the sterile interactions of years past. "Sometimes," he replied, "standing up for what's right means being willing to challenge the system." The story had become local legend. Other HOAs in the surrounding areas began reviewing their own practices, their own bylaws. Mark's fight had become bigger than just one neighborhood. His background as a land survey technician had prepared him for this moment in ways he could never have anticipated. Precision, documentation, patience. These were the real tools of change. As the sun set on Sunnyside Estates, the perfectly manicured lawns and identical houses looked different. They were no longer a symbol of oppressive conformity, but a canvas of potential, a community rediscovering what it meant to truly work together. The fence that started it all stood as a quiet testament. Sometimes the smallest things can spark the most significant changes. Mark raised his glass, watching his neighbors, no, his community, laugh and connect. This was victory, not in defeating an opponent, but in creating something better.